Happy Mother's Day. So I got a really fun text yesterday from Miss Amy asking if I could do the Devo, and I was like, okay, I'll do the Devo, and Lord, just show me what to talk about. And he's like, well, you didn't read your Devo this morning, so I think you should talk about that. And I'm like, okay. So this is a story that I had never heard of, but from my researching, I've looked that it's a well-known story. So this might be new, or it might be something you've heard before. I just hope it blesses everyone here and online. Okay, so this is a time when families and friends gather together, where gratitude and blessings are received, is the true fare of the day. It's a time when stories are told, some old and some new, and some stretched and some true. Stories about togetherness and gratitude at this special time of year. Reflecting on this day makes me think of Charles Plumb. He flew jets off the aircraft carrier Kitty Hawk during the Vietnam conflict. That is until his 76th mission. That day his plane was struck by a missile. He ejected his parachute into the enemy's camp and was imprisoned for 6 years in a communist prison. An ordeal that he was lucky to survive. Now turn your clocks forward 20 years or more, and Charles Plumb is married, and him and his wife are at a restaurant when a stranger approaches and asks, "Are you Charles Plumb? Didn't you fly jets in Vietnam off the Kitty Hawk? And weren't you shot down?" And Plumb was taken back and asked, "Well, how do you know me?" And the stranger replied, "Well, I was the sailor that packed your parachute." Plumb sat stunned as the man shook his hand and said, "Well, I'm glad it worked." Plumb replied, "If you hadn't, I would not be here today." So that night, Plumb could not sleep, which I would not be able to either, just thinking about that. He kept thinking about the stranger, and Plumb recounted, "I wondered how many times that I might have seen him and failed to say good morning, or how are you, or anything else for that matter, because back when he was a hotshot fighter pilot, and he was, in his mind, just a sailor." He thought about how many hours this sailor had spent time at a long wooden table in the bowels of the ship, carefully folding each chute, holding in his hands the destiny of a stranger, so that they would work perfectly if needed by someone like himself. This unexpected encounter changed Charles Plumb's life forever. Plumb began to travel the country as a motivational speaker. He tells a story, but ends each time by asking his audience this unforgettable question: "Who has packed your parachute?" And to which I was thinking, whose parachute am I packing? And whose life am I impacting? And so it made me think of my friends who are quilt makers, and they're beautiful quilts. And so they each have a timeline from the time you start to the process of completing it. And so I have this one in my house, and I bring it out every once in a while, and I've never really thought about it, but it was symbolic because it has 12 squares, which 12 months equal 1 year. And thinking about the years of my own life and the years of your own life, of how many people impacted your life, like Plumb, from the sailor who impacted Plumb's life. And so each of those little threads and each of these little squares were picked out, and how God has picked out your life and your destiny. And the threads made me think of, a golden thread through each, so many thousands of millions of stitches, and how many stitches that you have stitched in other people's lives and in your own lives. And so this question seems appropriate in every season. Who is it that has packed your parachute? Did you really do it on your own? Did you really get here without any help? Or were you, as Charles Plumb discovered, graced to have someone in your life behind the scenes who had your back, who packed your chute, so that you would have a life that you enjoy now. Which makes me think of how God has, well, you're a twinkle in his eye. So before you were born, he already had plans for you, and he already knew how he was going to form you. And this is a familiar verse, but some people have never heard this verse. In Psalms 139, for you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb, and I am fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful, and I know that full well. So as you have a time of reflection of this day, let this be true to you, of renewed gratitude, and let them be days when you pause to think, not only to thank God for blessings received, but for all of those special people too have toiled and sacrificed deep in the bowels of your life to give you a good landing that you enjoy today.